Welcome everyone. Thank you so much for choosing us for today's second presentation. My name is Hermina and here with me is Gabor, another representative of our foundation. So first of all, I'm going to introduce us a little bit. So the two of us, Gabor and I, represent the ASH Foundation for Environmental Protection, which is a bit of a mouthful, but here we are, ASH Foundation for short. And we are an organization who operates in Serbia. We are relatively new. We were founded in 2016, yes. And we are run by these four lovely people that you see on your screen. And our main occupation is collaborating with preschools, elementary and high schools by either fully or partially funding their school garden projects. Now today we are going to discuss how did schools in Serbia manage to keep their school garden projects alive during the pandemic, under this very apt title of Saving the School Garden, because very often that was the case. So we have started funding school gardens in 2018. And since then, we have collaborated with 23 different organizations. What you have to know is that outdoor education is not very commonplace in Serbia, and that means that the whole school garden idea and project are relatively new. And as such, the schools that I am going to talk about, or the school garden projects that I'm going to talk about, are also relatively new, not established more than 3 years ago. So I cannot really speak to sort of 5 or 10 years ago established gardens as in sort of more established ones. These are relatively new gardens, and we are going to look at how they fared over the various situations during the past year and a half. First of all, we are going to look at Serbia's COVID-19 timeline in regards to the school, in regards to education. The first patient was detected in the beginning of March, and from there cases rose rapidly. And on the 5th, this is important, on the 15th of March 2020, all classes in both kindergartens and in all schools were suspended. And for the next 2 months, neither kids nor teaching staff was allowed to enter the premises of the school. And even freedom of movement was limited. That means that people weren't allowed to leave their homes after 5 p.m. on weekdays and not at all on weekends for the next 2 months. And this was obviously a critical period, because during this time, this was a time that actually made or broke the garden project, because during this time, no one could attend to their gardens. Then in the beginning of June, children were allowed to return to the school classes, but this was a very limited amount of time that they were allowed to stay there, and only the kids who wanted to improve their grades. That means there was, again, no work done in the school garden. And then from the beginning of July, obviously the summer holidays started. Again, this was a period after a very stressful few months when there was actually not a lot of opportunity to go to the school garden. So this would be from early March till 1st of September, very little, if any, work could be, on average, done in the school garden. Then on the 1st of September 2020, regular classes started again, in-person classes. However, it was expected, everyone knew that at some point the online format was going to return again. And now we are going to look at a macro timeline, which puts us in more of a longer time period context. So as you can see, on the 1st of September, in-person classes started, and they lasted luckily till December, since the beginning of December. And this meant that the schools had relatively wide a window of opportunity to salvage what they could and to actually finish everything for the winter. And that's when online education started again. Now, however, the problem here was that it lasted a bit too long for comfort, strictly from the point of view of the school garden. And I'm not commenting on anything else. So by the 1st of April, the enough percentage of the population was vaccinated that it was decided that in-person classes would remain the order of the day from then on. And yes, that was, at that time, the recommendation was that the children spend as much time outside as possible. Now, you have to remember, earlier I said that outdoor education is not really a thing in Serbia. And at this point, when this was the recommendation, having a school garden, the value of having a school garden has rose exponentially, because then these schools actually had an already established space where they could take the kids outside and work with them. And the other thing about the sort of blue period, the second online teaching period, is that during this time, teachers were allowed to enter the school. And that meant that in terms of the garden survival, that it was not as, the situation was not as dire as in the gray period of time during which no one was allowed to go in there. And then the current situation, we are in 2021 September, when schools are not expected to be closed fully at all. If there are positive cases in the classes, then maybe that particular class goes into quarantine. Obviously, they test everyone else. And so this means that the continuum of the work within the school garden will not be disturbed as much as it was previously. And that's where we are today. Now, as I said earlier, we have had the opportunity to work with 23 institutions. And we have seen during this last year and a half some amazing success stories, as well as complete abandonment of the project. Now, the schools, obviously, as you can see on these graphs, fared better. And when I say schools, I mean both primary and high schools. Out of the 15, only 3 dropped out. And the preschools, they fared relatively worse. But that being said, in preschools, in kindergartens, all of the responsibility goes toward the teachers in terms of upkeep. So these results are actually weren't all that surprising for us in the end. And when we looked at the data that we received from the schools and preschools, what we saw that there are 2 different aspects of the projects that we kind of see as pointers toward failure, toward potential failure or success. And these 2 elements are, these 2 aspects are the human element and the type of the garden. Now, first of all, I'm going to speak to human element. And by human element, what we truly mean is engagement. And as an organization, we put out yearly calls for proposals for school garden project plans. And we always ask that there's at least a 3-person committee that is responsible for the project. And what happens in reality most of the time is that there's usually maybe 1 or maybe 2 very engaged teacher, and then the school just kind of goes along. And this obviously can lead to problems. One such problem was that happened in one of the kindergartens is that there was this kindergarten teacher. She made a really good plan. We were very excited to work with them, but the pandemic hit and she was relatively close to retirement age. And in order to avoid getting infected, she went into early retirement, and simply no one else wanted to pick the project up. So that was it for them. And this obviously shows that the more people are involved, the higher the success rate. However, even that might not be enough, because we have another sort of negative experience with a school this time, where they actually had a group of teachers who were very engaged in the project. But what happened to them is that they got sick, so they had to go into quarantine. By the time they were allowed to come out of quarantine and everyone was healthy again, online teaching started. And where they erred a little bit, this was a primary school, and the project relied heavily on the 8th grade kids. Now, by the time online teaching was done, the 8th graders were almost, like, they started in-person teaching in April again. They had another month before the 8th graders would start thinking about Matura and whatever. So they didn't start the garden at all. And for everyone, it became such a negative experience that they just told us that they will not go through with the project. And this, I think, is a very good example of all the good intentions and engagement. Even if you have all of those, you still might end up in a situation where, well, things don't come through as they should. And what this changes for us and as an organization is definitely that we from now on are going to look in applications for some sort of either worst case scenario plan or some sort of plan on how to go through with the project, even if there's like a huge hindrance or like a huge obstacle. Because in this case, this was obviously a red flag that we missed. So that was kind of unfortunate. However, we have also really good examples of engagement, and let's spend some more time on that. Now, positive examples of human engagement were a bit difficult to come by during the pandemic. However, we have one kindergarten here who not only didn't look at the situation as a problem, but turned it around and turned it into an opportunity. So what they did, all of the teachers were involved in building the garden, and listen to this, they built the garden during the pandemic. And what they did, they went the extra mile and they involved the parents, volunteer parents, who could actually come in because they were working outdoors. Obviously, everyone had the masks and everything. But because of home office and shortened working hours, the parents had the time, some of the parents, obviously not everyone, but some of the parents had the time to come in and help. So what happened is that not only the community, so there was a community formed that didn't only involve the children and the teachers, but like a wider community of the parents as well. And because of that, as you can see from the pictures, they built a gorgeous garden that is thriving that has been thriving since last June or so. Then we have another positive example. This time it is a school, it is a high school. And what they did is similarly to the kindergarten, with a bit of out of the box thinking, they were able to take advantage of online teaching and homeschooling. So they had, now what you have to know is that this is a high school that teaches various agricultural professions. So first of all, the kids are older. They can handle way more responsibility, as well as they are already interested in the subject. So obviously this is kind of like a best case scenario type of situation. But that being said, they had, as you can see, they have a really big land available to them to use. And they had a very complex plan. And what they did is that they obviously couldn't start on time. So they assigned these small mini tasks for the kids to do at home with certain types of plants. and do the monitoring and tending to the plants at home while they were online teaching. And in April, when everyone was allowed to go back to in-person teaching, they brought their projects back and they planted the already established little plants and experiments into the soil. So that was a project that's actually astounded us all, because they took such an unusual approach, and they were able to sort of take advantage of this staying at home, and like this, the project became more personal for the kids who were involved in it, because it was actually their own plant that they got to plant into the school garden then, and then the engagement was amazingly high with the project. So this is definitely positive example. Now there's another human element that I wanted to speak to, and that's, since we are talking about relatively newly established gardens, that means the teachers often have either very limited experience with gardening or not at all, especially in urban schools. So what they sometimes do, and what we have been recommending, is that they get in touch with local either gardeners or gardening shops, whatever is available, and then they can get actual technical information and help from these either establishments or people. And what we see is that this is also an indicator of potential success, and definitely an indicator of the engagement of the wider community. Now, the other thing, if you remember, was that indicated potential success or failure is the type of the garden. And by type of the garden, we mean two different things. One is size, and the other is the type of plants planted. Now, we operate in northern Serbia, and we collaborate with schools in very different, and preschools in very different types of situation. And what we see, the tendency with especially kindergartens and urban schools, is that they usually go for smaller gardens, mainly because of space, because there's less space available for them. And also, unfortunately, very often urban schools, the schoolyard is all concrete. So they actually have to go for either potted plants or vertical gardens or raised beds or some combination of these. And then there's the rural schools. They usually have a larger schoolyard available to them. And as you have seen in our high school example, some of the rural high schools have even actual plots of land available for their use. So obviously that's the dream, but we work with what we got. And in terms of garden size, what I have to say is that what we see from the data is that spring, that critical spring in 2020, was actually not all that dry. So the gardens, the large gardens that are connected to the soil, didn't fare all that bad. Then the other type, the smallest ones, the smallest size, the potted plants, what you could also call portable ones, also fared well in those cases where the teachers simply took them home with them, and then they could keep them alive until they could return. So what we see from the data is that raised beds and these like sort of middle-size raised beds type of gardens that were not very versatile actually were the ones who fared the worst. And this would be in terms of size. Now, in terms of planted plants, in our calls for proposals, we usually ask the schools and preschools that they plan a variety of plants to use in their garden. Now, that being said, most of the applications that we get fall into one of these categories. So there are the edible gardens, which are usually vegetable gardens with the occasional fruit. Then there are the ornamental gardens. Their purpose is obviously to make the schools, to improve the school's ambient, as in make it pretty. And then there are the occasional herb gardens. Now, very few gardens are solely herb gardens, but we have those. So I will speak about the edible gardens first. Now, this is a very popular choice for obvious reasons, because the children get very excited when they can eat or they can consume the things that they grew. Now, the problem with these is that they are quite work intense, and without proper care, they tend to not do as well. And our findings are that in cases where during that 2-month no-go period, if there was no way to try and go around that and actually go in and water these gardens, for the majority, they didn't survive. However, very few gardens were slowly these types of gardens, so that actually proved to be a good choice to plant other stuff as well. Now, the ornamental gardens, we see here two types. Ornamental gardens are also somewhat popular. They are more popular in kindergartens, where they usually do either raised beds or potted plants. And the problem what can happen here is that since these plants are chosen because they are pretty, the people who planned the project chose plants that are very exotic, and hence they need a lot of care. As you can see in the picture down in the middle, there's a banana tree over there. So they can be really extreme, and also on the right next to the right next to the oh my gosh, I can't remember the word. Anyway, exotic plants. So these, depending on how exotic the plants were, obviously the more exotic, the worse they fared. But on the other hand, because a lot of these were actually potted in kindergartens and in urban schools, some of them did survive where the teachers chose to take at least some of the plants home. And on the left side, we see this example of that amazing kindergarten who mobilized the parents as well. And as you can see, they have, even though it's mostly ornamental, they have a great variety of plants. So they did actually quite well. And then we have the third variety of garden plants, and that would be the herb garden. Now these are, especially if planted directly into soil, as you can see on the right side, can be very sturdy, as I'm sure you are aware. And so the school that has the garden on the right side, they actually, after a little bit of weeding, could continue their work right where they finished off. Now they especially they have only these herbs, and what they do is they put more emphasis on what one can do with the products of the garden. So what they do is they tend to the herbs, and then as you can see in the middle with lavender, they create these various types of products that they sell on the local market, and that's how they make their school garden financially sustainable. While on the left side, you can see a herb garden that is planted in pots. Yeah, planted in pots, and what they did is they did take home the pots. So the children as well, not just the teachers. So that type also survived quite well. It is very rare. I think it's only these two schools that work exclusively with herbs, but it is very common for the projects to contain at least some herbs, which is actually a good thing because they are sturdy. They are quite sturdy, and as such, they survived the 2-month lockdown period quite well. And finally, what we see from the available information is what would a resilient school garden look like? Well, what we suggest based on what we have seen in the past year and a half is that it's either small, as in portable, or large, but definitely connected to the soil if possible. Then obviously a community around it is needed, as in more than maybe 1 or 2 teachers, to ensure lasting success, as well as planting a variety of plants in order to, in case something similar ever happens, that the garden needs to be abandoned for this or that reason, that that schools are not back, or preschools are not back to square one and having to start all over again, because that obviously is a very negative experience for the children, although useful because that's how life works, but much preferred if not the whole garden dies. It is much preferred. And yeah, so these would be our suggestions. We do realize that these are not groundbreaking, neither are actually very surprising. However, when we send out these calls for proposals, it is very common that at least one, if not more, of these aspects are missing from the project. So the learning for us as an organization is that to actually be very firm about these requirements in order to ensure that that the gardens are lasting maybe more than 1 school year. And finally, our conclusion is that since we got from the projects that were successful, we got a very positive response regarding having this project, especially during the time when it was recommended to go outside, but also during the whole time, because as the lady, I'm so sorry, I forget the name, who presented in the keynote speech said, that the benefits definitely outweigh the hardships that a school garden causes. And what we can do as an organization is to continue to collaborate with these schools and maybe help them out with the information that has been made available to us through our collaborations up to this point. And thank you so much.